Good afternoon, everybody. How we doing? Coming to you live and direct from the top of a tree. Out here grafting today. Sun is shining, and I thought I would just take this opportunity to put out another video. Now, as with all the videos on this topic that I'm going to put out, just before I begin, just to highlight, nothing of which I'm speaking about is in opposition to female problems, female struggles and female issues. If anything, quite the opposite. I'm trying to highlight some of the problems that men are dealing with so we can kind of better our position and help women, and we can all help each other, lean on each other, put the right foot forward, and kind of step into the future with positivity and unity. Now, I'm coming to you live and direct from the back of a provisional unit in Ealing. Now, for those of you who don't know, provisional units are education institutions for kids who've been kicked out of mainstream education. So kind of schools for kids who've been kicked out of school. Now, one of the sad realities of these institutions are they are predominantly full of men, full of boys, should I say. There are girls in them, but the ratio, even just if I was to just go off what I'm seeing in this school, you're talking about 80-20, 90-10. And what that is it is representative of a far bigger problem, and that is what men are facing in the education system. Men are falling behind women at every stage of education. Boys are really struggling, and the gulf between boys and girls is getting broader and broader. And yet, and I know this from experience because I'm here and I'm actually working in these spaces, but beyond that, I've read the research papers into it, and all the governing bodies that are meant to be looking at equality, and the specific politicians whose job it is to ensure equality. Everything I've read, there is no mention of the systemic failings of boys in education. No mention of the gap between boys and girls. The last paper that I was able to get my hands on was from 2019, and what they decided was the most relevant thing for them to look at was how regional, like where you're based regionally, how much that impacts your chances of receiving a good education, or where you are in the education system. At no point at all mate, the paper's like that thick. There is no mention of the systemic failings of boys in schools. And at every level, every socio-economic level, every regional level, boys are far behind girls. And this has been getting worse and worse. The problem is escalating. And yet the politicians whose sole role is to ensure equality, we hear nothing about it from them. And unfortunately, what it kind of says is that equality only really matters when it's helping to improve the equality of women and helping women's rights. And listen, I'm all for women's rights, but not at the expense of male equality. Now, I just want to go into provisional units and pupil referral units a little bit more. As I said, predominantly men, and beyond that, for anyone who spends any amount of time working in these places, I've been working in provisional units for over a decade, and they are quite sad places, if I'm honest. Now, the reason for that is, in my opinion, these institutions, the sole purpose of them is to prepare these young people for prison. The doors are locked. They look like prisons, they feel like prisons, and they're treated like prisoners. And I know because I went to prison. As a young man, I spent time in the young offenders, and I can tell you that these places, they are a little bit better, but they are a foreshadowing of where these young men and women are going to end up. And it makes me genuinely sad, and it's what it does is it's a complete stark reveal of how our government really cares for and looks after some of the more vulnerable people in the country. If you were to look at the stats socio-economic background to how likely you are to end up in one of these places, you would see. And actually, it exposes the funding problems in schools, because rather than put the money into helping keeping these students in mainstream education, if you were to look at the stats of what the likeliness of you to of where your life is going to head once you're kicked out of school and sent to one of these institutions, the stats are wild. And yet, rather than contribute enough money to keep them in mainstream education with their peers, in this country, what we do is we create these little boxes tucked away where no one really sees what's going on, no one hears about what's happening. This is where we put these vulnerable young people, and then they never leave them. They'll probably be in and out of institutions like this for the rest of their life. Now, I wanted to kind of then go on to so, okay, what does that mean? Well, okay, let's talk about the next stage on from this. So, okay, you spend your teenage years in a pupil referral unit, and then the next stage is you're banged up in prison. Now, having had first-hand experience of what it's like in there and the type of people, the notion that prison is full of evil people and full of hardened criminals is a myth. I think while I was there, I saw more mental health problems, more mental health issues, and more people suffering than I've ever seen in my life. It still sits with me now. That was a long time ago, and it had such a lasting impact on me, on what I witnessed. I'll just give you an actual example. So there was when I was in Glenparva, which was up in Leicester, there was a guy across the hall from me who paranoid schizophrenic, and every 2 days he would think that everybody was coming to get him. He would flood his cell, and he would bar himself in, and listening to him screaming, and that was one of the most traumatic things I think I've ever witnessed in my life, and it happened every 2 days. And rather than he get the support that he needed for a clear as day mental health problem, severe mental health problem, there he was next door to me in a normal mainstream prison. And that is representative of what prisons are. Prison is full of vulnerable people who are unable to kind of keep up with mainstream society. Usually 50% of all people in prison grew up in care. The socio-economic realities of ending up in prison, it's, you know what it is? Lack of opportunity. I remember looking around me and just thinking, fuck, these young men have clearly had no opportunity, no one believing in them. And listen, I'm not saying that crime doesn't need to be punished, but what type of punishment are we trying to distribute? For example, any research paper that's ever been done into the difference between incarceration and kind of corporal punishment as opposed to rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is the only way. And yet, I remember when David Cameron was in power, there was a huge paper done into imprisonment and drugs and all of that, and kind of clearly stated the current approach is not working. And rather than acknowledge what the professionals and the experts had to say, it's not good. It's not good for business. You know, if you're a politician, you want to be hard on crime and well, listen, go to a prison yourself and have a look at what's going on in there. And I tell you, and the reason actually this has kind of come up for me is yesterday I took my 2 sons to the Royal Festival Hall to see an exhibition called No Comment, and it was such a powerful exhibition. So it's all art created by offenders and being exhibited, and you can go in there and there's a range of different kind of art mediums, from sculptures to paintings to drawings, and it was extremely powerful. And my children didn't really understand what was going on, but for me, myself, one of the curators, I was reading his little blurb, and he was in Feltham in 2008 at the same time that I was, and just the way he described the impact that time in his life had on the rest of his life, and him as an artist and the art that he creates, for a period of my life that was in kind of the grand scheme of things wasn't that long, that time still resonates with me now, and is probably the most artistically influential in everything I do, and that is because of how profound of an impact it was. And it kind of, I felt really emotional yesterday, I'm not going to lie. I even now, like, speaking about it, getting quite emotional, but it just highlighted, and I would highly recommend anyone who's kind of got some free time, go down and check it out, because there's something special about looking at art from people who are locked in a cage. And yeah, you get to, if there's anything that really resonates with you, they've got these special forms, and you can write a personal letter to the inmate who made the piece of art. And for me, as a concept, that chance to let someone know how their art has impacted you, you could change someone's life with that, and that's extremely powerful. And I suppose I wanted to just use this video to highlight that we need to be doing more for people. Now, I'm not going to differentiate between men and women in this, but I would just say that the predominantly prisons are full of men, and these educational institutions are full of men, that these schools that people have been sidelined, and I think we need to do more for boys and men. And yeah, that's my thoughts for today. Peace and love to everyone, and hopefully what I'm doing will gather some momentum, and actually I'm hoping I'll be able to make a real impact out there. But I love you all, take care, have a nice day.